The wind howled over the battlements of Harrenhal, dragging with it the scent of blood and ash. The once great castle, blackened from dragonfire years ago, now served as a fortress of secrets and screams. Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, stood over the battlements, his grey eyes watching the horizon like a ghost from the snows of Winterfell. But there was no honour left in those eyes, only the cold clarity of a man who had made peace with betrayal. It hadn't started like this. Ned Stark had ridden south with hope once, with dreams of justice, peace, and a future where children wouldn't wake to the sounds of fire and steel. But the South had teeth, and the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen, had sunk them deep into Ned's ideals, chewing until only duty remained. He had once called Robert a brother. Now he called him a traitor. It began the day Aerys summoned him after Brandon Stark, Ned's elder brother, was captured trying to rescue Lyanna from Prince Rhaegar. Instead of rage, Ned offered obedience. The court had watched in silence as the Northern Wolf bent his knee, his voice calm, unwavering. "I serve the crown, your grace, even if it is stained with my brother's blood." That was the moment they knew. Ned Stark had chosen power over blood. Aerys was amused. The North bends to fire, after all. Ned was given lands, influence, command. Harrenhal was made his southern seat. He was tasked with hunting rebels, dousing flames of resistance. He did so with ruthless efficiency. Small folk whispered his name in fear, not reverence. Mothers warned their children of the cold wolf from the north, more terrifying than any southern serpent. Jon Arryn fled the capital. Robert Baratheon declared war. And in a twist no bard would dare sing, it was Eddard Stark who led the march against his former brothers-in-arms. His sword, once meant to protect his kin, now swung in the name of madness. At night, he dreamed of Lyanna, of the tower, of her. Screams, but he never turned back. Rose Bolton became his right hand, his blade in the shadows. Together, they rooted out the rebels hiding in the Riverlands. Whole villages were burned for harboring dissent. Men were strung up, left to rot in the crows' mouths as a message. Resistance breeds ruin. When he captured Benjen, his youngest brother, it was Rose who asked, "Shall I do it, my lord?" Ned had nodded. He didn't stay to watch. In the north, tales turned bitter. Maester Luwin in Winterfell stopped receiving ravens. Catelyn, once promised to Brandon, married a lord of the Vale instead. The Starks were no longer lords of honor, but hounds of the dragon. The whispers became louder. Ned Stark had sold his soul to the Mad King, but it was not greed that guided him. It was fear. He had seen what Aerys did to the Defiant. He had seen fathers burned alive, sons tortured for a father's pride. The flames didn't care for honor. Only obedience could survive them. So he obeyed, and he made others obey too. But on the 9th year of Aerys's reign, something changed. Rhaegar returned from the Trident with a crown of rubies and blood on his hands. He claimed Lyanna had chosen him, that she loved him. Ned had wanted to believe it. But when he rode to the Tower of Joy and found her body, broken and alone, something inside him fractured. He returned to the capital with her body wrapped in northern furs, eyes hollow. "I have served you faithfully, your grace," he told Aerys, laying Lyanna before the Iron Throne. "But my loyalty has reached its end." Aerys had laughed. "Your loyalty never mattered. Your fear did." But fear was a poor leash for a broken man. That night, Ned walked out of Harrenhal and left the door open. He let the rebel prisoners loose. He sent ravens north for the first time in years. And he began planning for a different war. One not of rebels and kings, but of ghosts and guilt. The Mad King's hound had turned, but could he still be called a Stark? The night Ned Stark left Harrenhal was cloaked in fog, as if the gods themselves wished to hide his shame. The moonlight barely pierced the mist, casting the towers in an eerie glow. He rode alone. wrapped in a black cloak that bore no sigil. The dire wolf had long since been removed from his armor, his banners burned, his name whispered only in scornful corners of taverns and war camps. He had not earned the right to be called Lord Stark anymore. The rebels had no reason to trust him, and he had no illusions about forgiveness. Robert Baratheon would sooner drive a warhammer through his chest than shake his hand. Yet Ned rode toward the Vale, toward Jon Arryn, the last man who might listen. But the road to redemption was stained with ghosts. He stopped in small villages, saw the fear in people's eyes. Children ran from him, women whispered to each other, old men spat at the ground. Every house he'd ordered razed, every son taken from his father for a rumor of rebellion, every noose he signed off on, it all lingered in the silence around him. At night he heard Benjen's voice, not in words, just the sound of breath, leaving a young man's body, the thud of his knees hitting the ground. Roose Bolton had made it quick at least. That was something. By the time Ned reached the Eyrie, winter had started to bite at the edges of the Vale. Snowflakes clung to his shoulders as he approached the gate. The guards didn't recognize him, at first. When they did, swords came out faster than questions. Jon Arryn met him in the hall with silence. "I didn't come to beg," Ned said, weary and gaunt, "and I don't expect mercy." Jon's eyes were older now, colder. "You served the Mad King like a butcher serves his cleaver," Jon said. "You let your brother die. You let your sister die. You murdered the rebellion from within." "I did," Ned said simply. "Why? Are you here? Because the war isn't over, not truly. Aerys has grown paranoid. He talks to shadows, burns his own council, and Rhaegar. He plans something worse. He believes in a prophecy, a child to rule them all. He'll burn the kingdoms if it means fulfilling it." Jon didn't speak, he only listened. "I've done terrible things, Jon," Ned continued, "but I'll not let the world burn for a crown." It was not an apology, it was a warning. Jon kept him in the Eyrie for 3 days, under guard. Then one morning, Ned found a cloak waiting for him, stark grey, with a small note, "Ride north. Tell your people who you are again." He did. Winterfell had changed. The Godswood was quiet but not peaceful. The heart tree wept with sap like blood. The servants bowed in shock. Maester Luwin cried. He hadn't expected them to accept him. Yet they did, cautiously, like one might accept a ghost at their table. Robb was barely a boy. Bran, a toddler in his mother's arms. Rickon wasn't even born. Ned held them all that night, but his eyes stayed fixed on the window, on the snow. He called the bannermen days later. Some refused to come. Others came only to curse him. But a few remembered the man he had once been. The quiet wolf, not the king's dog. In the great hall, Ned spoke without fanfare. "I was weak. I served evil. I believed it would protect us. I was wrong." A silence fell heavier than the snow. "Now I ask not for loyalty, but for the chance to make it right." It wasn't a speech of grandeur or manipulation. It was a man bleeding truth in a room full of old wounds. It worked. Roose Bolton was the first to kneel, not out of honor but hunger for more blood, more power. But his voice gave others the courage to follow. The North would ride again, not for the Targaryens, not for the Iron Throne, but for vengeance, for memory, for the name they had buried in the ash. Ned Stark was a man torn by his past, but the cold had finally burned the fire from his soul, and in its place winter rose. The banners of the North once again flew above Winterfell, but they no longer symbolized peace. They were war-torn, sewn back together by trembling hands, raised by men too tired to feel pride. This wasn't the great call of a noble house returning to glory. It was the final breath of a people betrayed, trying to reclaim what little of themselves remained. Ned stood in the Godswood, snow gently gathering on his shoulders. The weirwood watched him with bleeding eyes. the red sap pooling beneath the roots like an unspoken judgment. He had prayed here as a boy, whispering hopes for love, honor, and peace. Now he stood in silence, unable to ask the old gods for anything. He didn't deserve their mercy. Maester Lewin approached quietly. "The bannermen await you in the hall." Ned nodded. "Let them wait. They've waited years already." But time wasn't on their side. In King's Landing, Aerys had grown increasingly unhinged. Rumors told of nightly executions, of wildfire stockpiled beneath the city. Rhaegar had vanished again. Some said to the east, others whispered he had built a stronghold in the Stormlands. Whichever the truth, it was clear the dragon's fire was growing wild and untethered. The North had to act. When Ned finally entered the great hall, his bannermen looked to him not as a lord, but as a weapon. Men like Manderley and Glover eyed him with quiet distrust. Karstark wouldn't even meet his gaze. Yet they had answered the call. He addressed them plainly. "Aerys sits on a throne of corpses. He murdered our kin. He disgraced the North. I helped him. There's no forgiving that. But I will not stand by and let his madness consume more." He paused. "We march south. Not to conquer, to destroy what should never have lived." The words settled heavy in the air. Not one man cheered, but they nodded. War had returned. Their first target was Duskendale, a small town once shattered by rebellion, now patrolled by royal loyalists. It served as a supply route between King's Landing and Dragonstone. If they could choke it, they could stall the Crown's movements. Ned rode at the front beside Roose Bolton. The man had become more shadow than flesh, his eyes cold as the snow they travelled through. "You think they'll forgive you if you die fighting for them?" Rose asked as they camped outside Duskendale. "I don't need forgiveness," Ned replied, "just the chance to do what's right." Roose chuckled. "Right doesn't win wars, my lord. Fire does. Steel does. Fear does." And perhaps he was right. The battle for Duskendale wasn't glorious. It was chaos. Buildings burned, civilians screamed, blood turned the snow to sludge. Ned fought like a man possessed, cutting down men who once called him comrade. He didn't fight for honor. He fought to bleed the past from his bones. When the smoke cleared, they held the town. But at what cost? Dozens dead, children orphaned, and among the wounded, Sir Roderick Cassel, Winterfell's oldest sword, and the last man who still called him my lord with affection. Ned sat beside him as he bled, the old knight's breath shallow. "You did what you had to, didn't you?" Roderick asked. "I don't know anymore." Roderick smiled faintly. "You still carry your father's blade. That means something." It didn't feel like it did. As they buried the dead, a raven arrived from the east. Jon Arryn had begun his own campaign from the Vale. Robert Baratheon had retaken Storm's End and was hunting for Rhaegar. The tide was shifting, but the raven bore another message, a secret one, addressed only to Ned. "The Queen seeks a way out. She fears for her children. She will meet you at the Weeping Tower in 3 days. Cersei Lannister, the lioness of the capital, wife to the king's heir. If she turned against them, it would tear the royal family from the inside." But it was. Also a trap waiting to snap shut. Rose urged caution. "She's a Lannister. They don't weep, they bite." But Ned had seen too many betrayals to trust or doubt too quickly. "I'll go," he said. "Alone." The wolf who once bent the knee to fire was now walking into the lion's den, but winter was not afraid of beasts. The Weeping Tower stood crumbling against the dusk, its stones wet with the cold mist rolling off Blackwater Bay. It was once a lighthouse for lost ships. Now it watched over a dying kingdom. Ned Stark approached the base alone, his sword sheathed, his heart beating like a drum in his chest. He'd seen too many ambushes to walk in unprepared, but if Cersei truly meant to defect, it could be the blow that cracked Aerys's kingdom from within. He entered the tower, every creak of wood beneath, his boots echoing through the hollow stone. She was waiting at the top, Cersei Lannister wore black, not mourning attire, but armor in its own right. Her golden hair was pulled back, her green eyes sharp like broken glass. A single lantern lit the room, casting her features in flickering shadows. "You came," she said, not as a greeting but a calculation. "I came alone," Ned replied, glancing around, "just as your raven demanded. You're either braver than I thought or stupider." Perhaps both. A silence fell between them. Outside, the wind howled like a dying beast. "You were his hound," she said coldly. "You hunted rebels. You killed children. You burned homes." Ned didn't flinch. "And yet you married into that same madness." Her lips twitched. "Touché." She poured 2 cups of wine and handed him one. He didn't drink. "You said you wanted out," Ned said. "Speak plain." Cersei looked toward the window. "The king is insane, you know that. But Rhaegar is worse. He believes in omens, prophecies. He says our son is the prince that was promised. Do you know what that means to a Targaryen?" He didn't need to answer. "It means fire," she continued. "It means burning the past to cleanse the future. He's planning something at Dragonstone, something vile." "You fear for your children," Ned said. "I fear for the world," she replied. It wasn't a lie, and that scared him more than anything. "I can give you access," she whispered. "Guards will look the other way. Servants will keep quiet, but I need protection. If I help you bring down the dragons, I want my children safe." Ned hesitated. He had spent years serving monsters, justifying his silence for the sake of order. Now, the monsters were beginning to turn on each other. If he didn't strike, soon there might be nothing left to save. "Agreed," he said. "But if you betray me—" "I won't," she cut in, "because I want to live." They made plans, swift, quiet, and deadly. Cersei would open the gates to the Red Keep. Ned would lead a small force under the guise of a prisoner exchange. Once inside, they would strike at the heart. But betrayal runs deep in the blood of kings. 2 nights before the plan was to unfold, word came that Jaime Lannister, Cersei's brother, had murdered the Hand of the King, Lord Connington, slit his throat in the throne room. The act was not sanctioned, nor part of their plot. Aerys flew into a rage. He ordered the wildfire. Caches beneath the city to be ignited at the first sign of rebellion. Cersei sent one final raven. "He means to burn us all. Move now, or die in ash." Ned stood in the war tent outside King's Landing, surrounded by his northern lords. The walls of the capital loomed in the distance like a beast waiting to devour them. Rose Bolton leaned against a post, cleaning his blade with slow strokes. "She'll betray you, Lannisters always do," Rose muttered. "Perhaps," Ned said, "but we've no choice." He looked at his men, not with pride, but with resolve. "We ride before dawn, not to take the throne, to end the fire before it spreads." The banners of the north were raised, flapping. In the wind, like ghosts, they would enter King's Landing not as conquerors, but as executioners. As Ned saddled his horse, his mind returned to Lyanna, to Benjen, to Brandon, the blood he had allowed to spill in the name of a false peace. He would not let the fire claim more, and if he had to die to stop it, so be it. The sun had not yet risen when the north moved. Under the cover of darkness, Ned Stark led a hand-picked unit of hardened men, veterans, ghosts in steel and snow. No banners were flown, no horns sounded. Only the soft clatter of hooves on frozen ground betrayed their approach. Their faces were grim. Each one knew this was not a siege, but a final reckoning. At the city's eastern gate, a single lantern flickered. A signal. True to her word, Cersei had bought them entrance. As they passed through the narrow alleyways of King's Landing, the scent of death thickened. Fires still smouldered in barrels, guarded by thin-eyed gold-cloaks who turned away at the sight of them. Ned couldn't tell whether they followed Cersei's orders or had simply given up on the crown. Rose Bolton trailed behind him, blade drawn, smile faint. "Never thought I'd fight beside you, Stark," he said, voice hushed. "You with your honor, me with my knives." "We're not fighting together," Ned replied. "We're finishing something." They reached the Red Keep just as the first light touched the spires. From here they would split. Rose and his shadows would slip into the dungeons, kill the pyromancers, and secure the wildfire. Ned and his chosen few would go straight for the throne room. If they could cut off the head before the body knew it was bleeding, they might avoid a massacre. But fate never favored the clean kill. Inside the keep, chaos already bloomed. Loyalists screamed as they were cut down by their own. Lannister guards turned on Targaryen men. It was as if the very stone of the Red Keep had fractured with paranoia. Ned moved swiftly through the corridors, cutting down those who stood in his way. His sword was slick with blood, his hands shaking with every strike. He wasn't a young man anymore, and he wasn't killing for a king. He was killing to stop one. They reached the throne room. The doors were already ajar. Inside, King Aerys stood hunched before the Iron Throne, his fingers twitching, lips quivering as he muttered to himself. Behind him, 4 pyromancers clutched vials of wildfire, their faces twisted with manic devotion. Ned stepped forward, voice steady. "It ends here." Aerys turned. "Stark," he hissed. "Traitor, hound, you bent the knee. You bled for me." "I bled for fear," Ned said, stepping closer. "Now I bleed for justice." Aerys screamed. "Burn them all!" The pyromancers raised their vials, but Rose Bolton arrived behind them like a shadow, daggers flashing. 2 went down before they knew he was there. A third caught a blade in the neck. The last dropped his vial, which shattered, igniting a column of fire. The flames licked up toward the throne, catching the tattered tapestries, casting the Iron Throne in a sick green glow. Aerys screamed, stumbling backward, his robes catching fire. Ned didn't hesitate. He plunged his sword through the Mad King's chest, pushing him into the flames. The fire roared louder, as if devouring not just flesh, but the years of pain, the layers of lies. And just like that, the rain of fire ended. Silence fell in the throne room. Rose stepped over a body, looking unimpressed. "Dramatic." Ned didn't respond. He looked at the throne, ugly, jagged and cruel, the embodiment of everything he had betrayed his family to serve. He turned away, but the war wasn't over. Moments later, a breathless messenger stumbled in. "Prince Rhaegar!" he gasped. "He's landed at Blackwater. He's brought dragons. Not real dragons. Targaryen loyalists, Stormland's mercenaries, and soldiers hungry for vengeance. Rhaegar hadn't just come to reclaim the throne. He had come to punish those who dared, steal his prophecy. And he brought his son, the boy they called Aegon. "The city will burn unless we hold it," Rose said flatly. Ned stared at the Iron Throne, still crackling with faint smoke. "We hold nothing," he replied. "We stand for the people, for peace. If Rhaegar wants the throne, he can choke on its blades." He turned to the Northmen. "Get the civilians. Outblock the ports. Tell Jon Arryn and Robert this is the final storm. The North would not run. It would stand, even if it meant facing the dragon one last time." The storm broke at dusk. From the cliffs above Blackwater Bay, Ned watched as Prince Rhaegar's banners crested the horizon. Black and red, the dragon of House Targaryen snapping in the wind. Thousands marched behind it, armored men and hardened sellswords, their discipline sharp and silent. At their center, Rhaegar himself sat astride a white steed, a dark cloak over his silver mail, and beside him rode a boy, no older than 6, golden eyes wide with awe. Aegon, the promised prince. To the loyalists, he was the rebirth of destiny. To Ned Stark, he was a child born into madness. The people of King's Landing were already fleeing, some through the eastern gate, others packed onto ships, desperate to escape the coming siege. Ned had ordered the evacuation with cold efficiency, watching as mothers sobbed and children clung to fathers too scared to speak. This wasn't victory. This was survival. In the Red Keep, Rose Bolton sharpened blades while muttering prayers to gods that didn't listen. "We can't hold the city," he said for the third time. "I know. You're not going to give it to him, are you?" Ned shook his head. "I'm going to burn it first." Rose laughed, genuinely amused. "Now you sound like the Mad King." Ned said nothing. He walked to the balcony overlooking the throne room. It still smelled faintly of ash. The Iron Throne loomed below like a broken fang, untouched since Aerys's death. He wouldn't sit on it, no one should. By midnight, Rhaegar sent a raven. "Surrender the city, bend the knee, the boy shall rule in peace." Ned penned a reply in his own hand. "No throne born in fire can hold peace. Come and see." The battle began at dawn. Rhaegar's forces struck from the south, breaching the city gates with brutal speed. Ned had left them mostly undefended. He needed Rhaegar inside, needed him close. The plan was madness, suicidal even. But he had watched too many crowns poison too many men. This had to end. As the Red Keep was surrounded, Ned gathered his last men, Manderley, Glover, the few who still believed. They wore no sigils, only grey cloaks and quiet fury. "Today we die," Ned said simply, "but not for kings, for a world free of them." Then they struck. The battle in the Red Keep was chaos. Hallways turned to killing grounds. Men screamed, in the name of houses that had long since lost their honor. Blood soaked the marble floors. Ned cut down 3 men before reaching the grand stairwell. Rhaegar was already there, stepping over corpses like stone. They met in silence, swords drawn. "Why, Ned?" Rhaegar asked. "Why betray us all for nothing? You stole my sister. She loved me. She died alone in blood." That was all. Steel clashed, sparks flew. Ned had once admired Rhaegar, his music, his grace, his quiet strength, but now he saw only obsession, a prince chasing visions, willing to sacrifice thousands for a whisper of destiny. Their blades rang like thunder. Rhaegar was younger, faster, but Ned fought like a man with nothing to lose. In the end, it wasn't skill that won, it was pain. Rhaegar lunged, and Ned drove his blade up, straight through the prince's heart. The dragon fell, and beside him the child screamed. Aegon, wide-eyed, face pale, stood behind the guards, staring at his father's body. Ned dropped his sword. The boy reached for the hilt. Rose raised his blade behind him. "No!" Ned barked. Rose hesitated, then smirked, still soft even now. Ned pulled the boy into his arms. "I won't kill a child for his father's sins," he said. Rose turned, disgusted. "Then he'll become your death." "Let him," Ned whispered. The Red Keep burned around them. Later, when the ashes cooled and the banners of every house were torn from the towers, Ned Stark disappeared. Some say he returned to the north, living out his days in silence. Others say he vanished across the sea, taking the boy with him. The Iron Throne was melted in a fire lit by Ned's own hand. No one ruled afterward. For years, Westeros was broken, but it did not burn. And in the tales passed from campfire to castle hall, they speak of a man with grey eyes and bloodied hands, who betrayed his family, his king, and even his gods to give the world one final chance at peace.